This is the second day of Secure in Sport, and we've been talking about a lot of things, accountability, how easy it is to just get caught up in sport and forget what it is that it's really about and what the fans are and how they fit in, how sport helps bring communities together. And I mean, my whole life has been following sports. I mean, if people say, what's your favorite sport? And I say the one with a ball. You know, I like them all, and I think one of the real things that's happening here in the U.S. is the increasing popularity of soccer, or as my friends in Argentina and around the world would say, the real football. How can you play football if you throw it? Sunil is, he's an economist, and I'm always reminded of an economist. It's Harry Truman's famous line. He always was looking for a one-arm economist, so the guy couldn't say, but on the other hand. And is the president of the U.S. Soccer Federation, and has been referred to as the George Washington of American soccer. I don't know what that means, but he's the most influential guy in forming this, and really has harnessed the rising popularity of the sport. He was instrumental in having a permanent women's soccer league. Has been very big on equity issues, and you know, maybe he's the most influential person, successful person in American soccer since Carly Lloyd, as somebody pointed out to me. But there's just no other person that we could have to talk about this more knowledgeable, more influential, more on top of what's going on, and not just American soccer, but the world of sport. So I'm going to start with my first question. Please don't go Ted Cruz on me now, Sunil. But look, there's a big elephant in the room when it comes to worldwide soccer, and that's the situation at FIFA and Sepp Blatter. And you know, everything that's happened there, I read in the Saturday FT, there's some kind of reluctance on his part. Give us a kind of an update on the status of international soccer and how this affects fans or how it affects the reputation of soccer in general.
Well, you know, you always want to blame the elephants. There's donkeys that make mistakes too sometimes. Look, the last 4 months, 5 months in particular, have been a very difficult period for the institutions involved in international soccer, international football. Less so for the sport itself. And what do I mean by that? The sport is extraordinarily strong. The underlying asset, which is the sport, kids playing, tournaments happening, all of that is continuing. The institutions have found themselves in a lot of difficulty, but it shows how strong the sport is. So at FIFA, obviously, especially since May, where the Department of Justice and the Swiss government have intervened, there's been a lot of turmoil. And we're going through a process now to try to set forward a number of changes, reforms, that would prevent that from happening in the future. I think a lot of those will pass the FIFA Congress next February, but it's been a tumultuous period, and we've endangered everything good that those organizations have done. And there's plenty of good things the organizations have done in shepherding the sport, but right now the news is all bad. What does it mean for fans and for federations? I mean, we've been affected. Other sports have been affected. I was at a meeting in Washington last week with the Association of National Olympic Committees, and people from other sports are saying, you guys got to get this straightened out because it's having impact on us, the IOC. Less so on American sports. I don't think the NFL or the NBA are looking at this and saying it affects us. But people around the world are affected by it. But the underlying part of it, which is the game itself, goes on very successfully, all the leagues around the world, and we've got to figure out a way to get what has been a very damaged relationship with the international community in terms of trust, and that's going to take time.
Yeah, I often refer to myself as a Roman Catholic and a Major League Baseball fan, and both institutions survive the fools that run it. Says something about it. I mean, people.
There may be some truth in that.
But you know, when I think of international sport, you know, FIFA, even the Olympic Committee, or I think of big institutions, the NFL, the NBA, it looks like that they're standing between me and the sport. They're always telling me that I can't gamble, or I can do a fantasy league, or this is, you know, we're going to go behind closed doors, we're going to decide where the Olympics are going to be, or we're going to decide where this event is going to be held. Is there any place for the but a fan, I mean, you know, FIFA's in Zurich, and I think to the average soccer fan, it's so far divorced from them. Yeah, they love the sport, but is there anything we can do to bring it sort of closer to people or get people more involved in there? So,
yeah, I think there's a number of things that can be done, but look, the institution that oversees the game, whether it's FIFA or one of the local confederations or even U.S. Soccer, isn't in direct contact day to day with fans. So you're not arguing for less regulation, I don't think, and there's a minimal amount of regulation that's needed, whether it's in the rules of the game, the basic laws of the game, as they're called in soccer, or in schedules in a particular league. But after that, it's really about making sure that people are playing with a consistent set of rules, environments are safe in stadiums and so on. Otherwise, you don't have too much contact with fans. Now, if you're a fan of a particular team or national team, that's different because the people in charge are organizing the team. But otherwise, it's relatively minimal. An average fan's interaction with one of the governing bodies should be very small, and it generally is very small. What's happened over the last 6 months, it's been in the news a lot, and you know, people haven't been pleased with what they've seen.
But the average fan sees, I have season tickets to the New Orleans Pelicans, that the NBA is getting ready to sign an enormous contract with the television networks. And what do you think, that I'm going to get cheaper tickets or more expensive tickets? Am I going to continue to pay $10 for a hot dog, or I'm going to have to start paying $15 for a hot dog? I mean, it seems like there's some sort of disconnect between the kind of prosperity and what the fan gets, at least from my vantage point.
Well, I mean, the prosperity in when you've got those TV contracts, where a lot of that goes, and in some of the sports in the U.S., defined by collective bargaining agreements, is to the players. Right? So the costs of players goes up as a percentage of revenues in certain leagues. That's part of it. You may want to think about becoming a vegetarian. That would help. Some of us have taken that route and stopped drinking so damn much.
Yeah,
You'll be in good shape.
I'm 71. I'm not changing wives, political parties, sexual orientation, eating habits now. I'm pretty much I'm pretty much stuck where I got.
See, you got to be open to this stuff, James. You got to be open to it. Not all of it necessarily, but open to some of it.
I'm struck by we've had Condoleezza Rice here, who's terrific sports fan. She and I picked one time in Sports Illustrated the start of the college football season. I don't think we got much right, but what the heck, we were out there. But you in particular, and I think American soccer has been very forward on this kind of pay equity, gender issues and stuff like that. Why don't we talk a little bit about that and give us some of your views about it?
Well, it's tough to follow the secretary on the issue, but you know, I think a few things. A lot got made this past summer in that the women's national team of the United States, or U.S. Soccer, received $2 million, and last summer the German national team, or the German Federation, received 35. Those numbers are accurate, but they're not at all taking into account the revenue differences between the Men's World Cup and the Women's World Cup. So on one point, you've got to consider that. It can't be completely independent of revenue. Now, having said that, I think we all understand that there has been years of discrimination, both in sport and in society, about the role of women. That needs to change. And there's any number of ways it can change. And in the U.S. side, we have been leaders in this for a long time, in terms of pay, in terms of resources, in terms of staffing for our programs, in terms of grassroots participation. The U.S. is far ahead of most countries around the world, all countries around the world, in terms of participation rates. And Secretary Rice mentioned one of those issues, one of the things that helped us enormously was Title IX, which wasn't just about sports, but it got to the source of the problem, which was participation. Resources being put into girls and women's sports that set a trend throughout the country. If you had that in other places in the world, it would change things. So more resources is absolutely a key towards women's sports, towards girls' sports. Then you can talk about all the other things at the other end of the spectrum, having more representation in leadership positions, having, you know, there's pretty well established now data, having 30% participation in whether it's a corporate boardroom or in a nonprofit boardroom changes the dynamics for the better. So you want better governance? One easy way is to have more women in the room. Right. And we're nowhere near most of those targets in sports bodies. At FIFA, nowhere near it. At U.S. Soccer, a little bit closer. So a lot of those things have to happen, because what we really need to do, I mean, the pay equity issue, no one is really saying the WNBA players should make the same as the NBA players, but they're not governed by a nonprofit body. What we really need to do is make the WNBA bigger, more resources towards the WNBA, make that a bigger business. And that's happening in soccer on the World Cup. And we need to really continue to put more resources into girls' sports. In the U.S., roughly 40 to 45% of our registered players are girls. You won't find many countries in the world that are like that.
Now we're getting to something that I think is really important, and that is the intersection of politics and sports. And we can't pretend like it doesn't happen. And you know, you being an academic, I'm always reminded of Woodrow Wilson when he left being president of Princeton and run for governor of New Jersey, and they asked him why he was doing it, and he said to get out of politics.
Right.
Title IX was a mandate. It just said you must do this. You must have this participation among female athletes. Soccer around the world, immigration policies, or you know, you played U.S. soccer in Arizona during the middle of the kind of immigration. You're tied up in that debate whether or not you want to be or not, aren't you?
Yeah, listen, the governing bodies, including FIFA, have this prime directive: government shall not interfere in sport.
But it's okay if there's subsidized stadiums.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's mostly a nonsense position to have in today's world, for exactly the sort of reason you mentioned. So no interference, but we need security for events, we need subsidized stadiums, and we need the following things. So to think that governments aren't going to have a role in 2015 and beyond is nonsensical. In a couple of the issues you've raised, the immigration issue in Arizona, and there were two issues in Arizona. We had just bid for the World Cup, and then legislation was passed. After that, challenged, and a number of parts of that were struck down regarding immigration. And we played there in 2012 after a number of parts of that had been struck down. And then in 2014, you had another issue, which was a discriminatory issue, or a religious freedom issue, if one thinks of it that way. And luckily and correctly, Governor Brewer didn't sign that legislation, which let us off the hook about a game that we played there in 14. So the NFL had looked at a Super Bowl problem there as well, but luckily she didn't sign that. So the intersection is absolutely there, and we're sticking our heads in the sand to think if we can stay out of it completely.
Yeah, I completely agree. If you remember, Arizona didn't refuse to recognize the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, and there was pressure put on primarily by sports. I mean, the NFL wouldn't go. A lot of things happened. If you look in South Carolina, the NCAA wouldn't hold any events in South Carolina as long as they had the Confederate flag. So there is this constant tension or intersection between sport and politics. I think during the Ukrainian crisis that we played a prep game for the World Cup there, didn't we?
We did, and now there was a second set of issues there. One was a security issue, because it was literally unfolding as we were about to play a game there. So first priority had to be the security of our players, and the second was the kind of the messaging issue. And on both fronts, we were in regular communications with former and current friends of yours in the Washington area to find out. One was, are we going to be safe? And two is, are we sending the wrong message by playing? And it was too early on the latter, but in the end, we decided not to play the game in Ukraine. And literally, as the team was in Germany on their way, we moved that game to Cyprus, and we played Ukraine in Cyprus. So that was how we handled, that tricky situation.
Like I saw Commissioner Bratton outside, who was here. And very sort of relevant is safety. I mean, every time I go to a game, and particularly when the stadium is packed, I'm sitting there saying, oh, and now with the drones everywhere and everything, I mean, this has got to be something that if I were in soccer and had any hair, I'd pull my hair out worrying about it at night.
Yeah, listen, so it is something new. Technology is changing in some ways very positively. In other ways, it gives us additional challenges. I'd be in way over my head, have a drone flying above my head, I guess, to try to comment on that. With
but I mean, but I mean, sport needs the government and private security agencies. I mean, there has to be this is going to be a huge issue as we go forward.
There's no doubt, and that's why that intersection absolutely has to be accepted. You can't possibly think about putting on a sporting event, a major event, without government support. Whether it's from stadiums, whether it's from access to stadiums, all of those things, tax laws and so on. I'm not sure that the requests that either the IOC or FIFA or other governing bodies make of governments are completely realistic in certain cases, but they continue to make them.
Okay, so I'm going to go there. American soccer is more than I think any other major American sport, a sport of immigrants. Like, I'm just guessing off the top of my head. Kids
It is
come
very,
from Park.
yeah, fair enough.
Kids come, from Latin America. They come from the Middle East. They come from Africa. They come from around the world, and where soccer is a game. There is a charged immigration debate in U.S. politics. But I'm pretty fair in saying that, I think. Do you see yourself or other sports league getting in the middle of this immigration debate, how it sort of plays out back and forth?
Well, U.S. soccer by charter doesn't get involved in direct political campaigns.
Right, but
however,
you get sucked into them.
Sometimes jump into them anyway. The last thing I do every night is kiss 3 Mexicans.
Right.
My wife's Mexican, my kids are Mexican, and they're all Mexican Americans.
Right.
So I think it's incredibly inappropriate that we think about building barriers, whether they are the physical sort or the metaphorical sort that get talked about in various parts of the country in various states. So you are right, we are an immigrant community, but the issues there are far beyond sport and soccer.
Right.
And at a humanistic level, we've got some pretty strong views on it that actually support.
I think my views are very close to your views, but I'm just saying not in abstract, in a real situation, this has become a big discussion in American politics. I'm not certain. Like I say, you and I are probably pretty close on this issue, but can't you see some danger of you getting, lack of a better phrase, sucked into this debate?
We do get sucked into it in some ways, but listen, our biggest rival on the field is Mexico. We have some great games with them. But we also have, as you've mentioned, huge numbers of immigrants playing on our national teams, in our clubs, whether they're first or second generation. America's the immigrant community, as you already mentioned.
Yeah, Americans. Yeah, you're right. Your wife is not. She's an American. No one American is any better American than another one. I mean, my ancestors came from Nova Scotia, France, or some way. But my first tongue was French. That doesn't make me less American than someone else.
Agreed.
But I'm just one of the things that people, when we look at sport, and again, I alluded to this at the beginning, but in the FIFA, when these big events are awarded, the Olympics or something like that, I always have the feeling that they go behind closed doors and the process is not very transparent. Is there any kind of way we can bring some transparency to this? We certainly would support that. I think there are some ways, and some that you'll see. The obvious ones are much tighter and stricter set of rules about what committees and people that are bidding on these competitions can do and cannot do, 1. 2, complete transparency in what it is that they do in the process. 3, certainly should be a public vote, and the IOC doesn't have that now. FIFA actually will in the future because it'll go to all 209 members. So better rules, more transparency, public vote, and then some technical standards that actually mean something. So if you're going to have a set of regulations about this is what it takes to put on, whether it's a World Cup or a track and field championship or the Olympics, then you got to stick to those, because otherwise, if none of that infrastructure exists, then it's pretty easy to say we will produce it at some point in the future, and that throws out a lot of documents that people have been. I was the chairman of the host committee for the 2013 Super Bowl in New Orleans, and if you want a Super Bowl, I'll give you a tip: get a taxpayer-funded stadium. But every time that you get one, strangely enough, New York, Silicon Valley, the New San Francisco, Minnesota, which you lost. So at least I'll give them credit. It's transparent. You get $800 million from the taxpayer, they'll give you a Super Bowl.
Well, it becomes a precondition almost that if you're going to have the expenditure, whether it's taxpayer or privately financed, and you're right, many of them are taxpayer financed, it becomes a condition with the league or with the governing body, we will do this, but you got to guarantee us an all-star game and a Super
Right.
Bowl or whatever it might be.
So we talked. I said the elephant in the room in the donkeys, but there's really one big elephant and one big donkey in the room, and that's gambling. And people are, and I'm full transparency. I pick against the point spread on Tony Kornheiser's radio show, and I was awful last year, but I'm off to a pretty good start this year. I think I'm like 9-5 and. A push or two along the way. And I've been checking the card this weekend, and LSU's getting 6 in Tuscaloosa. But I confess right up front, gambling is something I enjoy doing. Yeah, but what is in around the world, and when I talk to people like Chris Eaton, who knows more about this maybe than anybody else, it is an enormous underground economy that is subject to corruption and everything else. Does American soccer or world soccer have a view on this question?
Well, so it's not been a big issue in American soccer, and in some ways people would say that's because American soccer isn't mature enough yet for lots of gambling to take place on it.
It's a huge issue in world soccer.
Absolutely, and I'd argue with the view that it's not mature enough. Look, we have a view that's in most of the country different than the view in Las Vegas. We have a view in European soccer that's different than it is in the United States, where you can bet, at stadiums essentially. So it's a big issue, and then obviously the related issue of what's going on here in the last few weeks that's become very controversial is the fantasy stuff. So gambling in and of itself can lead to other issues, whether it's match fixing. At a minimum, it's got to be regulated, and now you're seeing that in the fantasy side. There's no doubt that's going to become regulated. But I don't think there's a world consensus on gambling per se. In a lot of places, it helps fund important parts of, cultural things in certain countries and so on.
Your league, you would not have a problem if professional betting on professional sports event became legal in the United States. If Congress passed a law and the states decided to do this.
Well, you mentioned you were getting 6. If you get 6 on any soccer game, somebody's giving you 6, take the bet every time.
Yeah, 6.
That would be fine.
But
at a personal level, I think it needs a lot more analysis. There are too many issues for me to give you a quick answer on. I've got mixed feelings about it, I think is the best way. And that's not sitting on the fence. I just have mixed feelings about some of the things that happen that are related to gambling.
But it's gambling going on now.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not like it's not the question are people gambling on these games? They're gambling like crazy.
Well,
the
you asked
question
me
is,
if we have a view on it. So there's people doing a lot of things, as it turns out, that we may or may not approve of.
Yeah, but if I bet on the LSU-Alabama game, that's not the equivalent of being a drunk driver.
I would agree with that.
Okay, all right. I mean, I'm just, I'm glad. Unless
you happen to be driving while you're betting on the game. But
yeah,
I'm assuming you're not doing
don't
that.
tax your bet when you're driving.
That was after your $13 beer at the game, so I'm getting concerned. But
but there's another topic, and I did not realize this, and this is safety in sports, and I thought it was a big problem in American football, but apparently soccer has safety issues too. Would you talk to us about that and what you're doing to sort of address these safety issues?
Sure. There's the biggest area of concern, obviously, is concussion and related issues. And we've done a lot in that area, and there's a lot of studies, but a lot more to be done. So research is certainly a big part of this. And I don't mean 50 years down the road, but we're engaged with...
Let me give you a cue. If you hit your head hard, it's bad.
That's absolutely right. And that's true, in any walk of life.
Right.
So, but we've been engaged with the CDC, we've been engaged with the president on holding some conferences, and we've issued a number of, we've started a number of things, directives about return to play protocols for kids that have obviously been involved in a collision, or age appropriateness for heading the ball and so on. Most of the injuries, at least the ones that we've got evidence on in soccer, are really coming, that are concussion related, are head to head, and head to ground, and head to elbow. The heading of balls, there is no sort of long-term studies on, and at young ages, especially where there's the most danger, underdeveloped brains and so on, at 6, 7, and 8, most of the kids can't get the ball off the ground. So we are doing a lot of things in this area. It's an important area for sure. There's also some pretty strong evidence that the boys and girls are different in this area because the neck strength of girls is different. So we are certainly on top of this in every way because it's a big issue for sure.
Well, it is, and I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this. I mean, anytime to talk about sports, but to talk about with somebody that has the big overview, the kind of worldview of things like yourself. One of the things that ICSS is going to promote, and I think it's a good idea, is that something along the lines of a fan bill of rights, that the fans want some participation, want some say, want some consideration, want some as sport goes on. Because, I mean, I understand that the leagues have to put it on, but, you know, it's the passion of the fans and their kind of involvement that really makes sport work. And I know, and I'm in complete agreement with a little bit of it, is that, you know, and people like to gamble on it. There's no doubt about that. And, you know, it's like anything else, it certainly can be abused, but it's being abused now in sort of fundamental ways, if you will. Some of these larger events have just become inaccessible they just become corporate thing. And I don't know if there's sort of a good answer to that, but I mean, I think this is the kinds of things that obviously the whole idea of safety at events, these are the kinds of things that ICSS is going to be exploring and talking about and trying to get input on in the coming months. And I think it's a really important issue. I travel a lot around the world. I've worked in 22 different countries, I think something like 14 different heads of state. And the one constant in the world is sport. It's the one thing that you can talk about. I had the real, you know, growing up in American South, wasn't as involved in soccer is most people, and kind of started watching it and, you know, became a fan with the U.S. I went to the World Cup when the women won in Los Angeles with President Clinton. But this past May, I watched the Colombians play the Brazilians, and I was at the President of Colombia at the presidential palace. And I've never been so, my heart was in my throat the whole time when you see the kind of passion that they have for this game. So all sport is a real treasure. It's something that humanity has a great value on, and people like yourself that have a major role in sport. Yeah, and I'm sure that you're aware of this. You have a real responsibility and a real function to people in the United States and around the world. And I think we're fortunate in the United States to have somebody of your caliber and background and knowledge and understanding and passion to be running American soccer. And I know I speak for every American in this room that we think the future of American soccer is bright. And I think that we're also fortunate to have a group like ICSS that's willing to tackle some of these issues that other people have frankly been reluctant to do. And until we get the issues of gambling to site selection to safety to fans' bill of rights, until you know, when you have people that have some power and influence willing to put this center stage, I think that's something we should be glad they're doing and give them support and honor them for doing that. So on behalf of ICSS, I really want to thank you for being here and being so candid in this discussion. I think we addressed about every tough issue that you can address, from governance to politics to God knows what not. So thank you very much, and thank everybody for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.